Joe Torres for Free Press, and we're at the National Conference of Media Reform. We're talking to Todd Wolfson of the Media Mobilizing Project in Philadelphia, professor at Rutgers. What other titles do you have?
I think those two are enough right now. Feel good about them.
Well, tomorrow you're on a panel that talks about the coverage of labor in the media.
Yep.
And part of the Free Speech TV in this conference is also talking about the importance of independent media.
Yep.
How do those two issues intersect?
I mean, for me, they intersect in a bunch of ways, but I'll mark two, the two most important. The first is that, like many oppressed communities, people of color, women, workers are completely blacked out of the media.
Right.
And when they are in the media, they're misrepresented. Workers' voices are stereotyped and blacked out. And so at one level, this is important, and independent media is important in relationship to labor not being in the media, because independent media is one of the places where workers, everyday working people who are trying to get their needs met, have a chance to get their voice heard. And so that's one place where there's an important intersection between independent media and labor, the labor movement, but the workers' movement in general. The other place is that media reform, the media reform movement that Free Press has been so powerful and important in leading, has not drawn all the allies into the struggle that it can draw. And so the labor movement is the most organized movement of people in this country. It's diminishing, we all know, but it's still the most organized part of the country of people who have a vested interest in a more just media sector. So the other place where I think there's a really strong convergence of interest is arguing that we need to bring labor into our struggles for net neutrality, for just broadband infrastructure, for a fair media ownership laws, for you name it.
So how do we do this in a sense? How do we do this when we have an issue with when labor on some of these issues have sided with telecom companies and even groups like the Sierra Club and civil rights groups? So you have these traditional powerful institutions that are considered the political left or progressive or whatever. I mean, that's how they get categorized, taking positions that they're ideologically aligned with AT&T.
Yeah.
And these are powerful financial connections within jobs and financial support. How do we bring them in? Or how do we do this?
To me, there's three things.
Okay.
One, it's that we need to think about relationships in the long term.
Okay.
So a relationship with labor can't come a month before a bill around net neutrality is about to hit the Congress. We need to have built long-term relationships where we can look people in the eye and know where they're coming from and why they're coming from where they're coming from, and do our best to build communities of shared interest.
Right.
And that takes organizing, it takes a vision and a strategy that's long-term, and it takes people doing the work. That's one thing. A second thing is that classically media reform has turned to the Communication Workers Association, CWA, because CWA represents the workers who lay our lines when it's broadband, and that's fine. They are part
and
of
they're also the newspaper guild too.
Exactly,
Right.
and they're a part of this conversation.
Right.
But when we really step back, this is much bigger than CWA. This is about how workers are misrepresented. So we should be going after SEIU. We should be going after AFT. We should be going after the AFL-CIO.
Right.
And we should be building relationships based on the fact that they know that in the media structure, as it's currently configured, they cannot get a fair shake. So they have a vested interest in change.
Why don't we finish that? So we got a minute left, but talk about what is how is labor marginalized in the media? What is the typical frame you see and how labor is portrayed?
So there's a report coming out tomorrow at this conference at 9 a.m. And that report will say that in broadcast news, the major broadcast news networks in the last year or two, I can't be sure if it was 1 or 2 years, 0.3% of the news stories are about labor, and most of them not positive, but 0.3, not even 1%, 0.3%. And when labor is in the news, there's 3 or 4 classic tropes. Workers are greedy, workers are thugs, unions are lazy, or or newspaper, or we don't look at the bigger kind of structure of a struggle. So we don't look at why a struggle actually emerged. We only look at the fact that workers went on a strike. Not that they went on a strike because they hadn't had a contract for 3 years and they were being forced to take furlough days. And also another thing is we often focus on how much workers are making, teachers making 50 grand, but we rarely look at how much management makes in comparison to that. Right. So often the stereotypes are greedy, lazy, thuggish, right. But then there's also just a lack of context.
Right. Well, this is great. So this is great. This is when we talk. This is what Todd's going to be talking about at the National Conference of Media Reform on a panel on labor with CWAs on the panel, AFTRA, SAG, as well as yourself. Yes. And so it's going to be Mike Elk, who writes about labor in these times. So it's going to be a tremendous conversation. And thanks for being here, man.
Thank you.